Da ni ar ein cychwyn gyfeillion. Diolch yn galon chi am droi fyny. Am joc bod y stafell yn llawn. Hwn di'r trydydd darlun mawr da ni wedi arddangos. Syniad peterlord oedd o, fo sydd wedi ceradu'r cyfres yma, prosiect yma. Mae'n cael ei gyllido gyn Gyngor Gelfyddydau Cymru a Cyngor Gwynedd. Da ni'n ffodus iawn o gael peterlord yn ei geradu o, a wrth gwrs yn dod yma heddiw i roed y Darlith. Fel da chi'n gwybod, at llyfrau peterlord da ni'n troi bellach, cos da ni eisiau gwybod rhywbeth am hanes Coleg Cymru, da ni'n ffodus iawn o gael hynny. Warm welcome to you all to the third big picture. We've had a Darlun Dall and Sokochevsky painting, always get that wrong. And this is the third one. And we're very fortunate to have peterlord as the curator and obviously as the lecturer for this project. Thanks to funding from the Arts Council of Wales and Gwynedd Council. Felly, os newch chi sgwch dda ar y croeso i peterlord?
Diolch yn fawr Gwyn, a mae'n ffantastig i weld rhywbeth yn chi yma. Oedden ni'n dynau iawn ar gyfer y ddarlith gyntaf, os gofio ein iawn, mae wedi cynyddu iawn, mae'n yn wych. Ac fydd y ddarlithydd y tro nesaf, rhywun gwahanol, drwy lwc. A gawch chi'n meddyliol, mae'n siŵr gan Gwyn ar ôl ni orffen. Thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to see so many people here. It's grown, the audience has grown steadily for this series of lectures. Gwyn will tell you about the next one at the end of when I finish saying what I want to say. It'll be a different lecture next time, so you'll have a change of face. So, Port Taff, well, it is a very odd picture, and a very unusual kind of picture, although it's not a unique example. It's a picture that's painted on panel, for a start. Come in, Darlun. Mae'n ale yn y ffrant yn mynd i'n os ydyn. Mae'n wastad yn fawr boi. Rhywbeth gwbl iawn yn bit o. Anyway, this is a very unusual picture. It's painted on panel for a start. By the way, this is it before it was restored recently. This is it in its present condition. You can see that one of the panels had opened up there. And it's painted by an artisan painter. As you can see, it's quite naive in style. It's not painted by a painter trained in the academic tradition at all. Actually, the history of the painting itself, where it's been, is quite interesting, because at some time, probably in the 1950s or perhaps in the 1960s, it went to an important American collection known as the Longridge Collection, a man called Sid Leatherton, who was a very rich American entrepreneur, lived in Boston. He formed a huge collection of what the Americans call folk art. I would beg to differ with that definition, and also European high art as well. He was a huge collector of European painting in the United States. He died about 6 or 7 years ago now. And because there was so much European work in the collection, when it was sold, it came back to Christie's, and it was sold at Christie's in London, which is how we discovered the picture, because we didn't know about it. It had been buried in the United States for all those years. But anyway, having got it back, I might as well be frank and say we don't know either the date of the picture accurately, or what the picture is for, what its purpose was, who painted it, and why. Some panel paintings like this were in the 18th, 17th indeed, 17th, 18th and 19th centuries were installed as what are called mantelpieces. That's where the word comes from, mantelpiece. It's a piece of painting above a mantel, like that. So I've sort of faked this up to show you that might have been what happened, but as you can see, it's rather small for that. It's a bit small for that. So it might have been a mantelpiece, but it's small, and B, it's an odd kind of subject to stick in your front room above the fireplace, isn't it? Even though we've got it in our front room above the fireplace. Much choice about that. It is an odd subject for a domestic setting. One possibility is that the Welsh societies in London were in the habit of having paintings in their meetings rooms. And because of the subject, which we'll go into later on, it is possible that it was hung in one of the many Welsh Society meeting rooms in London in the late 18th century. But it's a bit of a mystery, so the next one. Now, another possibility is it could be a pub sign. Here's an example. This is the Goat Inn at Bala, or was the Goat Inn at Bala, and you can see very nicely painted, artisan painted goat there on the wall. This is a photograph by John Thomas from about I think it's a bit earlier than that actually, probably the 1870s, looking at the costumes. And in fact there is one pub sign with this image which survives. It's a pub called the Happy Union, which is at Abbey Cum Hir, Abbey Cum Hir over in Paris. I don't know whether it's still there. This was photographed back in the 1980s up on the wall of the pub. It's obviously the same image, though it's been adapted slightly, but it's from the 1880s, this particular sign, and this image, for reasons which I'll explain as we go along, is probably a bit earlier than that. One other fact that's interesting about it is that the particular pub where this hangs is on the Drovers Road into England. And of course we've got one interesting clue about this picture. If you notice down here, there's a milestone. And it says, to London, 97 miles. Now that would place it in Herefordshire, Shropshire, Gloucestershire possibly, if that 97 miles is accurate from London. And it seems a very odd number to put on there if it wasn't in fact accurate. So we're probably looking at a painting which may have been a pub sign. It's in very good condition, which suggests that it probably, if it was a pub sign, it wasn't outside. It may well have been inside as part of the wainscoting inside the pub. And it would have been sited, I would imagine, on the Drovers Road, one of the Drovers Roads in through those English border counties. But the fact of the matter is we don't really know quite what it is. Now I said it's a very unusual picture, but in fact there are 5 of them which survive. Okay, this is one of 5, 6 if you include the pub sign. The 2 big ones here are definitely 18th century, and they're painted on canvas. This one's actually just been sold last week. It was sold. Miles K2, who's familiar to some of you, acquired this one, which originally came from Bridgend. That's the provenance of that one, South Wales. But you can see they're all the same image. So these 2 are definitely 18th century. This is our one here. This is a very interesting one. This one is in the Welsh School at Ashford in Kent. Now that's, of course, the Welsh School, which was formerly in London, which was set up by the Welsh Societies of Cymrodorion, I think, wasn't it, or the Ancient Britons, can't remember, in the middle of the 18th century. I've not seen that one in the flesh. It's a rather bad photograph of it here, and there's a long inscription on the back, but there seems to be some doubt as to precisely what the date of that is. This one was in private hands until quite recently, then came up at a sale in London, Sotheby's I think, was sold. Again, interesting, Miles was the buyer again. But when he had the picture restored, the paint came off suspiciously easily, which led the restorer to think that it was probably a modern copy. I actually doubt that, because I can't see why anybody would want to copy this in the 20th century. It's an image which has had its day. It's not really a resonant image anymore. So we don't know. But so the 4 of them may well be mid to late 18th century, and I suspect that this one probably is as well. That picture probably is as well. You'll see that the other pictures are rather less naive in the way they're painted. They're quite sophisticated painters worked on these. This one's much more naive than the others. So what does the image represent? Well, it's the generic Welsh man. The generic Welsh gentleman, in fact, as portrayed or satirised, really, by the English. And the elements of that satire are really quite interesting. First of all, he's a gentleman, but he's poor. Well, that's quite consistent with the facts, because many of the Welsh gentry in the 18th century, 17th and 18th centuries, were in fact very poor. To be a gentleman was nothing to do with your wealth, it was to do with your lineage and other factors, and many of the Welsh gentry were really rather poor. He's also rather ugly, and he's also a drunkard. Okay, he's got a very large red nose there, and he smells. We know he smells because he's riding on a goat, which is a symbol of bad smells in other kinds of paintings as well. Also, a symbol of sexual promiscuity, which we'll talk about later on because that comes into it as well. And of course, the goat is closely, and has been for hundreds of years, closely associated with Wales in particular. You've also got some other elements. You've got the landscape in the background. You've got a mountainous landscape in the background, hills there. And you've got the obvious things. He's got a leek in his hat. He's got the red herring here, which is something which we don't associate well with Wales particularly now, but the red herring, what do you call it, the smoked herring, was associated with Wales in this period. He's got another leek down there. This thing, which has become a bedroll up here, was originally a cheese, a Cheshire cheese. It's become a sort of a bedroll up there. And he's also got his wooden bowl and spoons to emphasise his poverty up there. And in several versions of this, his clothes are very tattered and poor. So that's what the image represents. It's a satire on the Welsh gentleman. Let's have the next one. Now, the second reason this picture and these pictures in general are unusual is slightly more complicated. When an image gets into the popular consciousness, and the fact that we've got 5 versions of this suggests that obviously that there's something that's attracted people about this particular image. Normally when that happens, it happens this way round. You start off with an individual oil painting. This is Christmas Evans, this is the William Bruce version, this is the Hugh Hughes version, painted about 4 years apart. This one painted in, both of them painted in Carnarvon, in fact. And what happens is, they are engraved. They become prints, okay? And because they become prints, they get distributed very widely. Lots of people see them. And then people start to want their own image of them. So, you get naive copies, for instance, like that. It's a lovely little thing about this size. Don't know who painted it. It's actually got a little brass ring on the top from which it was hung on the wall, like a Greek Orthodox icon on the wall. Exactly like that, colours and so on. And then over in Staffordshire, you've got them turning out, especially for the Welsh market, because of course Christmas Evans was virtually unknown in England. You've got these ceramics for the middle class market, for the posh mantelpiece. Okay. So you've got, and indeed, in the case of William Roos, at the end of this, the demand was so much that Roos was painting copies of his own picture and passing them off as the original. So there are 3 of these. So that's the way it normally works. Okay, it goes down that way. But in our case, it works the other way. And this is really interesting because the source of that is in fact a print. The print comes first. This is where it comes from. Okay. It's a cheap, popular print. It's the sort of category we put them into, popular prints. Quite large, about this size, unusually large, with a woodcut and a text. Okay? And these prints were produced in large numbers in London. Let's have a look at the next one. One of the reasons they were produced in London was until 1695, printing was illegal in Wales. You weren't allowed to print in Wales. So people like Thomas Jones and Almanaciwr, producing the early Welsh almanacs, had to produce them in London. This is his self-portrait on one of them. What's the date of this one? 1684. He produced them in London, printed them in London, carried them back to Wales himself bodily, distributed them here, set up a network of distributors who would sell them at the fairs and at the markets. Okay, so it was quite a complicated business. The point is that the centre of this popular print trade with these woodcuts is in London, and it stays that way right into the 18th century. Let's have a look at the next one. You've got a large urban market for these things in London, and a system that you can sell them through. You've got shops and you've got peddlers and ballad singers and so on who can sell them. The way they were made was by the woodcut technique. This is a wood block. This is actually quite a small one. It's only about that size. No, it's about that size. So it's basically like a liner cut, which will be familiar to you. It's cut on the long grain of the wood, which enables you to use quite big planks, which is how this appears to have been cut on a single... Oh no, it doesn't. There's a mark there. Sometimes they were made with a series of planks bolted together like that. Sometimes they were made on a single cut. There's just a mark there which suggests perhaps that this was a series of planks put together. Now the point is, if you cut on the long grain of the wood, you can't get much detail. It's a pretty rough and ready sort of technique. And the wood cut is distinct from the wood engraving, which is cut on the end grain of a much finer wood, box or cherry. And that's a very, very fine technique indeed, but that's upmarket, that's posh. This is the bottom of the market, okay? And so these things are produced in large quantities in London. They're produced mainly around Soho in an area called Seven Dials, which is sort of the east side of Tottenham Court Road over there. That area continued to produce popular prints, well, produced them right from the mid-17th century right through to the middle of the 19th century. It was a major area for wood engravers. Let's have a look at the next one. Now, that's all very well, but where did the print come from? You know, it didn't appear out of mid-air. Well, let's go backwards. So here we are, 1880s. All right, this is the Plas sign. So we go back through two examples here of the sort of a posh painted version after the mid-18th century woodcut, and he comes, believe it or not, from a Meissen, German Meissen ceramic sculpture. That's where he comes from. This Meissen was produced in 1737 originally. Let's have a look at this. And he's known as Count Bruhl's tailor. Okay? There's a story attached to this. This Count Bruhl was, I think he was the chief minister at the court of Saxony. I've got it written down here somewhere. Yes, Augustus II of Saxony. He was the chief minister there. But he's also director of the Meissen ceramics factory. And he had a tailor who, the story goes, produced him a particularly fine coat on one occasion. And Bruhl was so pleased with this that he asked the tailor if there's anything he would like that he could give him as an extra present in addition to paying him. And the tailor said, "Oh, I'd like to go to a court banquet, a state banquet." But impossible, you know. So, but what Count Bruhl did was he got his chief sculptor modeller at the Meissen factory, who was Johann Joachim Kindler, to produce this kind of satire of the tailor, who was set in the middle of the table at a state banquet, so that he could say to the tailor, well, you were present at the state banquet, you weren't actually there in person, but your image was there. And mysteriously, this thing caused a huge sensation. It was incredibly popular. And Meissen started turning these things out, and unbelievably, 1737 is the first one, they were still producing them as late as 1925. They were so popular. This actually is a late one, but it's quite similar to the early ones. Well, on the basis of that popularity, one or two of them must have got into England, and the Derby factory started copying them. Now, Count Bruhl, who the hell is Count Bruhl? You know, that's no good as a marketing ploy in England, so he suddenly becomes the Welsh tailor. And he becomes the Welsh tailor, of course, because he's riding on a goat, and that's associated with Wales. I mean, this all sounds ridiculous, but I mean, it's true. It's true. And so here he is, and of course, these Staffordshires, these are produced in large numbers. This is a posh one, this is a Derby one, but the Staffordshire factories produced popular versions of this right into the late 19th century, and they come up on the market quite often. They're lovely things. So that's one half of the source, if you like. That's the bloke riding on the goat. Now, because there's another half, which is to do with the Welshness of it. So let's have a look at that now. The Welsh in London, of course, Welsh immigrants to London, migrants to London, have a very long history going back into the Middle Ages. And of course, before the Scots, and especially before the Irish arrived, we were the bottom of the pile. And like anywhere else, the bottom of the pile gets mocked, and when they become a threat, indeed gets attacked sometimes. One of the ways we know about the reaction to Welsh people in London in the 17th century, especially around the period of the Civil War, is through the popular prints, which were published in London, attacking Welsh people. This one's from, it's quite significant that they burgeon in the period of the Civil War, because London, of course, is parliamentarian, and Wales is, on the whole, royalist, and indeed Welsh soldiers fought at the Battle of Edge Hill in 1642, the first battle of the Civil War. So this one's just a year before that, and it's the Welshman's Inventory. Here's some examples of what's in the Welshman's Inventory. This is all in the text. Item, In the armoury of weapon to kill her enemy, 1 pack sword, 2 edge, 2 Welsh hook, 3 long club, 1 cun, 1 mouse trap. Cun, as in gun. Item, in the carden, 1 ped car-like, don't know what that is, 9 onion, 12 leek, 12 worm, 6 frog. Item, in the Lysweg, 2 ton cow, very funny if you're English, dun cow, what about the Welsh person says 2 ton cow, 2, as in 2 tons. 1 mountain calf. Item, in the common field, 2 Welsh nag, 12 long-legged sheep, 14 and 20 coat, as in goat. Item, in the prune close, 3 robin runhole, 4 hare, her own coods, if I can catch her. Item, in the pan, I don't know what that is, 1 half heblet of oat, 7 pea, 2 pea. Item, in the study, I almost forgot her, 1 Welsh Bible, 2 almanac, 1 erapata, 1 7 champions for St Taffy's sake, 12 pallet, 1 pedigree, and he goes on and on and on. The point is, you've got this Wenglish being used as early as that to mock the Welsh immigrants. This one is even worse. I won't quote you it all because it gets extremely rude. First, we'll show her postures for the gun. Faces to her valiant captain, shoulder her gun, or lay her gun upon her left crag. Take down her gun, hold her gun fast behind, keep up her nose, look in her arse or gun hole, put dust in her arse, then put 1 bullet in her arse, put another bullet in her arse, knock her down on the ground, draw out her stopping stick, or muckle prick, handle her stopping stick, put it into her arsehole, ram down her... It gets worse and worse and worse. It's pretty offensive. It is. It's pretty offensive stuff. And that was the image of Welsh people in London in the period. Of course, in 1642, in the Battle of Edge Hill, the Welsh mercenaries had this good sense to run away when things got a bit hot, which made it even more, made the Welsh even more vulnerable to this kind of stuff. So look at the next one. This is a little bit later, 1689. Oh, actually, can we go back one? Sorry. At the end of the Civil War, I forgot to give you this one. This is a very interesting thing from Pepys's diary, 1667. St David's Day, 1st of March. In the street in Mark Lane, to observe it being St David's Day, the picture of a man dressed like a Welshman, hanging by the neck upon one of the poles that stand out at the top of one of the merchants' houses, in full proportion, very handsomely done, which is one of the oddest sights I have seen in a good while, for it was so like a man that one would have thought it was indeed a man. So while the Welsh are celebrating St David's Day, their Welsh effigy is being hung by the neck from the English houses. Okay, the next one, please. Now, this is the Welsh fortune teller of 1689, just after Pepys here. So while Samuel Pepys is walking around London doing all this stuff that we know from the diary, this is the stuff that the common people are getting, okay, for a penny or a halfpenny in the street. This is the Welsh fortune teller, Geoffrey Morgan. Geoffrey Morgan. And here you can see we've got all the elements coming together. We've got the mountainous landscape, we've got the goat, and we've got the leek up here, and we've got the toasted cheese there. So we've got all the elements coming together there. The goat, generally speaking, the sort of image of Welsh people in this period is, I think, best summed up by one particular text, which we'll have, of course, to refer to later on again. This is called the Wallography. The Wallography was published in 1682 in London, and this is just a part of the text in which it describes the Welshman. We have been informed that they were dug from a quarry and that they dwell in a stony land, so that if we compare this kingdom to a man, as some do Italy to a man's leg, they inhabit the very testicles of the nation. And I pray, what are those but the vilest creatures that breed as well in the privities of the greater British world as those that are hatched in the pudenda of the lesser? But whether Welshmen are the aborigines of their country, as crab lice are the autochtones of theirs, and proceed only like them from the excrements of their soil, we shall not here dispute. I think the point is quite clearly made. Yes, let's move on. Let's leave that behind. Now you'll have noticed there were 2 prints, because Sean Ap Morgan has a wife called Unifred Jones. Do you know why she's called Unifred? She's the generic Welshwoman in the period. Unifred, Winifred? Holy one. Okay? In the 17th century, this is before the fashion for Welsh landscape gets going, okay? Nobody knows anything about Wales other than that it's barbarous, mountainous, and it has this important shrine, which is still important right through, it carries on right after the Reformation, because the shrine was built to its magnificent final form in the early 1500s. But it doesn't decline in importance, and you get advertising material produced in this form, in popular form once again, right through the 18th century. This one's from 1798, telling you about the virtues of the place, including a woodcut of St Winifred. And because of that, Winifred, in this period, rather than Mawr or Blodwen, was the generic name for the Welsh woman. Crops up all the time in the popular texts. So the next two. Now, the funeral sermon preached by the minister of Llangollen in Wales, i.e. Llangollen in Wales, is a very typical abusive and sort of nonsensical and stupid kind of sermon, taking the mickey out of the Welsh, as we've seen before. It's interesting, this particular one, because here he is actually mounted on the goat. At last we got it on the goat this time, in the same way as here, okay? It's Llangollen, this is a pun. In English popular texts, Gotham, with an M on the end, is an imaginary village in England where the inhabitants are supposed to be generically stupid. It's a sort of it's a byword for stupidity. So this is a Welshified Llangollen version of that particularly abusive kind of tirade. Now, the text of this particular print is interesting. This is where we get to the really fascinating bit about this image. Because part of this text is that really abusive wallography text, which I showed you. But from here, it changes. And all of a sudden, down there, we get a different text. We get a text which is written by, and I quote, an ancient Britain's description of his country and character of his countrymen. And it's quite different. This is a Welsh text, okay? And it sings the virtues of Welsh people and of the Welsh countryside as well. It includes quite a lyrical poem, in fact, about the Welsh landscape. And it's worth noting the dating, because the print's about 1750. When you've got 1751, you've got the establishment of the Cymrodorian Society in London. You've got the Ancient Britons, Welsh school, going on. 1726, you've had John Dyer, the Welsh poet, publishing Gronga Hill about his home in Llanddeilo, which becomes a very important influence on the landscape movement. You've got, for instance, you've got Richard Wilson in London painting. There's a change in attitude coming. It's a Welsh revival in the middle of the 18th century. And this print happens right on the cusp, really, on the two things. And you've actually got the two texts sitting together. So mysteriously, you've got a defence of the Welsh people and this tied to this satirical image. Let's have a look at the next one. Oh, by the way, one of the things that the Ancient Briton says, I've quoted this before, he says, I just quote a bit of this, he says, from what cause arises that insolence of men, that superiority of opinion, and that almost disaffection of soul, which Englishmen generally assume over the rest of their fellow subjects, if born the other side of the Tweed or the Severn, or if pointed at for drawing their first breath in a neighbouring sister island. It's quite interesting, isn't it, sort of pan-Celtic solidarity there in 1750. Now the point is, these prints became very popular with Welsh people. We kind of adopted this satirical image. And there's a remarkable piece of evidence for this, because this is a print from the 1770s or thereabouts, called The Welsh Curate, a London print, and look what's on the wall. He's got Portaif up on the wall there. Evidence about how these popular prints were used, because they're very ephemeral. These prints, by the way, they're rarer than pictures. There are less of those prints survive than the pictures. Okay, because of course they're just pieces of paper and they were stuck on the wall, then thrown away. But here we've got some very rare evidence of how they were used. And this is the Welsh curate, who in the period, of course, is famous for being poverty-stricken. The reason he's poverty-stricken, and we'll come back to this later on, is of course, because he's working for an English priest who is in absentia in England somewhere, and he's employed for pennies to look after the parish in Wales. And this has become a big cause of resentment in the 19th century especially. So here he is, look, he's doing about 6 different things at once. He's rocking the cradle, he's making the dinner, he's preparing his sermon, and he's listening to his boys' catechism here. And his wife, of course, is out washing for the gentry to make a living. So he's notoriously poor in the period. There's a coloured, but this one's unique actually, only one of these survives. There's also a coloured version down here, which survives in London. And here's another print, which again emphasises the poverty. This is called Welsh Parson, the proverbial poverty of the Welsh parson in the period. More evidence that the prints were very popular, by the way, comes from the fact that there are 2 copies surviving of the Sean ap Morgan print in the National Library, and one of them, the blocks are very, very worn, which shows you that there were a large number of these prints produced and sold. So the image has been adopted. Let's have the next one. Now, this business of stereotyping develops hugely in the second half of the 18th century, where prominent Welsh people, like Sir Watkin Williams-Wynne, become closely identified with the goat image. So here's Sir Watkin, okay, and his head's been transformed into a goat's head there. This is by Gilray, one of the most important satirists in London in the period. Ancient music, this is the Prince Regent here. Sir Watkin, as well as being patron of painters, of course, was a very important patron of music, especially what was called ancient music in those days. He was the patron of John Parry, whose picture we saw, of course, here 2 pictures ago. He was a great proponent of Handel's music, for instance. And so you see him here in a concert of ancient music, the sleek Welsh deity who music knows, the Alexander of the Tottenham troops, and so on and so forth. There's a whole poem about him in this context there. Let's have the next one. As far as evidence of Welsh people in London and the Leek is concerned, we can go to Hogarth. In the Rex Progress, the paintings for the Rex Progress were made in 1734. The prints come out slightly later and are reissued in various periods. But one of them, I can't remember if it's the 3rd or the 4th, is the arrest of the rake here. And he's about to be arrested by these 2 constables, who are Welsh, and it's St David's Day. They've got their leeks on their hats. And you can see them again up there. So I don't know what the particular reference made by Hogarth here to the Welsh as debt collectors is. There may be some specific association. Maybe Welsh people in London were particularly involved in that business. I don't know. But it's certainly St David's Day. We know it's St David's Day because it says so in the text. It doesn't say it's St David's Day. It says it's somebody else's day, which happens to coincide with St David's Day. I can't remember who it is now. But anyway, this is very interesting evidence that in the early 18th century, Welsh people in London were in the habit of wearing the leek on St David's Day. Let's have a look at the next one. And there are a number of images of Welsh people wearing the leek in the 18th century. There are a lot of popular prints, like this one, satirical prints, the Welsh feast on St David's Day. Typically ugly, smelly Welsh people here with toasted cheese, goats everywhere, and the leek in their hats. This one's more benign. This is St David for Wales, obviously designed to appeal to Welsh people in London. What's the date of that one? 1781. Same elements again, exactly the same elements as we've got up there. We've got the goat, we've got the leek, we've got the mountain landscape. So this is a derivative of that as well. Okay, they're all coming from the same source. And there's this extraordinary painting which turned up a few years ago. Nobody knows anything about this. It's now in the National Museum. It's hanging on the wall down there. An extraordinarily sophisticated painting. This is a classy painter who's showing off here by doing this fancy stuff with the candle and the light and the glass and so on. And we've got the toasted cheese down there, and we've got this very elaborate leek up here. And you can see it in the Hogarth as well. These things are really quite special. They look as if they're bound with some sort of metal clasp. Then I assume they're not real leeks. And they're beautifully made with these decorations on the flowers on them, and so on. They're all like this. I've never actually seen one of these. I don't know whether any of them survive anywhere, but they're rather beautiful things. But we know nothing about this. I think we can safely assume at the date that it's probably something to do with one of the Welsh societies in London. One of the well-heeled members of a Welsh society in London has obviously commissioned this, because it's not a nasty image. It's quite a sort of an amusing image. Okay, so we've got a situation where, bizarrely, this satirical and really very nasty image from the 17th and early 18th century in some way becomes adopted, and the elements of it become adopted, almost with pride, by the London Welsh. And I emphasise the London Welsh because that's really who we know about in this period. We don't, I think, know very much about St David's Day celebrations in Wales itself. I may be wrong about that, but I've not come across much. We know much more about what was going on in London, and it's a kind of an expat thing, isn't it? You know, you're much more patriotic if you're an expat than if you live here. I'm not going to pursue this into the 19th century and the 20th century. If any of you are interested, I wrote a book years ago called Words with Pictures, which actually, Winifred is on the front there, which follows the history of Welsh images and images of Wales in the popular press up to about 1860. So that, if you're interested, you can follow it there. But I thought what would be quite fun to do, just for the last 20 minutes or so, is to turn the thing around and look at the way in which, in the popular press, English people have been imaged in Wales by Welsh artists. So let's look at the next two. Well, first of all, there's not a very long history of this. One of the reasons is, of course, because printing was illegal until the end of the 17th century. And it gets going very slowly. And when it does get going, it's text only. It isn't until, actually, you can put your finger on it and say, 1798, that we get the first satirical image, which is, in some way, attacking the English, or the representations of Englishness in Wales, in this case the church. And it's the church, the established church, the Anglican church, which comes in for most of this. This is from a pamphlet written by Thomas Roberts, Glyn-y-Weddw, Cwyn yn erbyn Gwrthrynder, 1798. Now, Glyn-y-Weddw was the big friend of Jack Glyn-y-Weddw, who I expect you know of, the most important Welsh radical in the revolutionary period. Great fan of Tom Paine, wrote a pamphlet called Seren Tan Cwmwl in 1795, with the result that he had to get out of London, disappeared into Wales and to France to escape. And it comes, this group of people, Glyn-y-Weddw and Jack Glyn-y-Weddw, were the leaders of a Welsh society called the Cymrigyddion Society, which was founded in 1798, I think it was, I can't remember the date exactly, 94, the Cymrigyddion Society in London. And the Cymrigyddion were different to the other Welsh societies because they were Welsh speaking. Okay? Now, in the context of the French Wars in 1794, just after the Revolution in 89, setting up a Welsh-speaking society in London was a pretty in-your-face statement, okay? Because, of course, the English couldn't understand what was going on there, and that was where it was the main focus for radical London Welsh radicals in the period, led by Glyn-y-Weddw and Glyn-y-Weddw. Now, we don't know who made the engraving, but it carries lines by Jack Glyn-y-Weddw, and it's attack on the collection of tithes by the fat, presumably English, parson here, oppressing the poor Welsh people, the child here doffing his hat, and so on and so forth. So this is the first time it appears. Let's have a look at the next one. Now, the Cymrigyddion Society is, I'm particularly interested by the Cymrigyddion, and their history is rather fascinating. And if you look at the standard texts about them, the sort of short, if you Google them, you'll find that they went through this revolutionary period and then they rather fizzled out. And that's not quite true, because actually they went through a second radical period in the 1820s, and a revival. And one of the people who was very closely involved with that revival was this man, Hugh Hughes, who some of you, I'm sure, have heard me talking about before. Hugh Hughes was a painter, but before that he was a wood engraver. And in fact, Hughes made his living in London. He trained in Liverpool. He was born in Llandudno in 1790. He trained in Liverpool, he had his apprenticeship there. In 1814 he moved to London, and he worked in Seven Dials and Soho, around there, for English popular printmakers. Catnick and I can't remember the name of the other one, two main publishers. Catnick was one of them. He worked there, producing these things. He learned his craft there, if you like. But the crucial thing about Hughes is that he came back to Wales, and it was entirely through Hughes's efforts that Welsh publishers in the second decade of the 19th century, started to include pictures in their publications. There had been virtually none before this. Hughes comes back and literally goes round the publishers from John Evans in Carmarthen up to Thomas G, the first Thomas G, not the famous one, his father, up north, Saunderson in Bala. This is Saunderson, he published this one. And he persuades them to use woodcuts and wood engravings in their texts, and he produces them. And he's down market, okay? He's produced a book of engravings called, wood engravings called The Beauties of Cambria, which is very upmarket, which makes his reputation. It's a series, it's a group of, a long series of landscape engravings and engravings of beautiful buildings, famous buildings in Wales. That's upmarket. But he also goes down market, right to the bottom. He's a propagandist. He's a radical propagandist. And he's also a great proponent of the Welsh language. He believes in this period that the way to develop Wales is through the medium of the Welsh language. He's quite specific about this. This isn't a retrospective perception. And everything he does is through the medium of Welsh. So, he gets John Jones in Trefrwch at this time, later in Llanrwst, for instance, to publish this sheet for him, which is going to be sold around through the fairs by peddlers and ballad singers. And it's called Doethineb Cenedl y Cymru, Trioedd y Gwragedd. Now he picks up these strange Trioedd y Gwragedd from the Mawrian archaeology with which William Owen Pugh and Iolo Morgannwg were much involved. They're allegedly old, they probably weren't, they were probably an invention of Iolo Morgannwg. But what they are these three-part statements about the role of women in society. He's very concerned about the role of women in society in many ways. But these are about women. So, for instance, and they're oppositions. They're good things and bad things set opposite to each other. And because of the title, Doethineb Cenedl y Cymru, we know that the good things are associated with the Welsh one, and the bad things are associated with the other lot. So, they're quite difficult to read. Tri pheth ffieithrwnt a wraig, a flindid corff a dodrefn, sengarwch diogledrwydd. That's the bad news, okay? Tri pheth apparent o'r I hoffi cartref, a'i deulu yn dosbarthus, a'i orchwilion yn llwyddiannus, a'i wraig yn gariadus. That's the good news, that's us, okay? So, we're the good guys, and what he does is, look, here is the Tri pheth ffieithrwnt a wraig, a dirty body and furniture. Sengarwch, I suppose Sengarwch means, foul-mouthed, bad, doesn't speak well. Diogledrwydd, laziness. And here she is sitting by a fireplace there, total chaos all around, everything in a state of disorder. And down here, here's the Tri pheth apparent yw'r hoffi cartref, a'i deulu yn dosbarthus, his family in good order, his business successful, and his wife is loving. And he's sitting there with his family around him, everything in order, the dresser behind him, and crucially with Hughes, he's holding a book, he's reading a book. This is the great symbol. The word for Hughes was the central thing, whether it was the word of the Bible or the word of scientific knowledge. The word was the thing. This was the medium by which we would improve. It was Hughes that was responsible, and I think he translated them as well, for the production of a whole series of little pamphlets aimed at children. They're sort of moralising pamphlets. They are originally written in English by Lee Richmond. These were huge bestsellers in England. This one was originally The Dairyman's Daughter. I don't know if you've ever come across these, but they were huge bestsellers in England. Hughes brings them to Wales. He gets Saunderson, which of course Saunderson's press in the Bala is originally the Methodist press. And they produce them, and Hughes produces new woodcuts to go on the front of these things. And they're sold throughout Wales. So his role in this is radical, both in the sense of introducing visual imagery into Welsh publications, but also in his very radical texts. Let's have a look at the next two. Now later on, Hughes becomes, from 1827 on, Hughes becomes very closely associated with the Cymru in London. I won't go into the details of it, but it arose from his excommunication from the Methodist Church because he fell out with John Elias, and there was a huge argument about the toleration of Catholics. Hughes was very radical, and although he disliked Catholicism intensely, Roman Catholicism, he saw no reason to deny civil rights to Roman Catholics any more than denying civil rights to Methodists. And so he wrote a petition which was presented to Parliament, in which he said that his chapel during Crescent in London favoured toleration. John Elias had him expelled. There was actually fisticuffs in the Set Mawr one Sunday morning. Yeah, there was. There was a punch-up. And Hughes was and two of his friends, Carvachol and I can't remember who the other one was, were physically put out on the street. He never went into a Methodist chapel again. But so that contributed to his radicalisation. And in 1830, the Cymru Society, as a group of people, produced a new magazine called the Cymru, which was later described as that revolutionary Welsh periodical. It's a little bit of an overstatement, but it campaigned on many, many issues, and it had a vision of a new Welsh person, a new Welsh man in this case, the Cymru. And here he is. Look, this is Hughes engraving and the explanation of what all this means there. He's the word, essentially, he's writing. It's all to do with the word, okay? He's got his books around him, but it's a new Wales. It's a Wales which looks forward to the steamship. There's a hot air balloon. There's a factory. It's in an industrial Wales, as well as an ancient Wales of cromlechs and castles, and the Eisteddfod tradition is referred to there, and so on. It's a whole vision of a new Wales. It's a most remarkable upsurge of radical Welsh thinking in London in this magazine in the period. Later, I've got to cut through all this, but later on, Hughes re-emerges at a crucial point in Welsh history as an engraver once more, and that is on the publication of the Blue Books in 1847, which of course, as I'm sure you know, criticised not only the state of education and general knowledge of the people of Wales, but also the morals, and especially the morals of the women of Wales. And it was interpreted at the time very much by radicals like Hughes as an attack on the Welsh language. There's a debate about whether that's the case or not now. But anyway, that's how it was interpreted at the time. And Hughes was the first to go public in attacking it. He produced a series of bilingual printed sheets. They were printed by the Principality newspaper in Cardiff. Glyn-y-Weddw was the editor at the time. There are 10 of them in all. They're called Pictures for the Million of Wales, million being the population of Wales at the time, and they satirise the commissioners for education who were sent down to London. You see they've got ass's ears, Shuttleworth here, who organised it all. He's got a coal scuttle on his head, shuttle coal he's known as, and he's got, devil's hooves on his feet. The 10th one is particularly interesting, because in the end, Dame Venedosha throws the commissioners into the sea. Okay? That's the final one. And it's interesting, because this one surfaces again a little later as a now famous print, Dame Venedosha Alias Modred Gwen, which is actually a map of Wales with all the counties and so on and so forth. Again Hughes, but he reused this image which he developed here. Darlith the treachery of the Blue Books, which this is known as, the phrase coined by R.J. Derval in his drama that he wrote about this in, I think it's 1851, a little bit later. That drama by R.J. Derval, and this usually isn't acknowledged, follows very closely the scheme of Hughes's engravings. And lots of Welsh speaking historians know about R.J. Derval, but very few of them have actually looked beyond Derval to these engravings by Hughes. I shouldn't call them engravings, they're lithographs. So the next two. Now, one last event. In Carnarvon, between about 1835 and 1845, there was a remarkable maker of woodcuts called James Cope. Despite his name, he was Welsh. He was born in Carnarvon, and his children were born there as well. And he produces a remarkable series of popular prints between 1835 and 1845 on a range of subjects, but they do include some political prints, and especially prints which are to do with which attack the church. So I've included this early one here because of the priest, and you see the priest is again being carried off to hell here by one of Satan's servants here, along with the military. Anybody know what that's a reference to? Peterlord. the Peterloo massacre in England, where radicals were attacked by the Hussars and many were killed. That's a reference to that. And you've got the church and everybody implicated. The British state is implicated in the oppression of the common people here, and of course it's all lumped under the heading of the Tories. The Tories carried home to their family, i.e. to hell. Okay? The English church is also attacked. This is a wonderful print and text, fantastic text, extraordinarily funny text here. It appears that in 1841, the Bishop of Bangor, in his wisdom, tried to revive the tradition, very long, back into the medieval period, tradition of having sports after service on Sunday, which had been stamped out by nonconformists. The bishop, it appears, I've never been able to get quite to the bottom of this, but it appears that the bishop tried to reinstate this, and this is a furious attack on the bishop, who is satirised up here with his followers. Part of the text, I've translated part of the text here. This gives you a flavour of it. Come see a bishop, black as night, like Jehu on his mule, and greasy priests devoid of grace, and narrow curate fools. They groaned and swore as they chased the boar. They cursed his slippery tail, and some would spit and some would shit like pigs beyond the pale. This is our respectable nonconformist popular culture in the 19th century. There's a lot of nonsense talked about that, I can tell you. These things are absolutely fascinating, these popular countries, because this is where it's at. This is where the people were. Okay, let's have a look at the next two. Cope also produced two images about the teetotal movement. Teetotalism arrives from the United States in the mid-1830s and becomes a big debate between moderates like Hugh Hughes, who was not teetotal, and the teetotalers themselves. And the popular prints become a means of propaganda for both sides of this. Hughes becomes involved on the other side. Cope becomes involved portraying here the evils of drink, the beauty of the drunkard. Okay, that's actually. So he becomes involved, Cope, in a range of issues. And I should say that there's another producer of popular prints working at the other end of Wales in Cardigan. It's very interesting that there are a very large number of these prints, but they are only produced in these two centres, one in the north and Cardigan in the south. They don't come out of industrial Wales in this period, which is very interesting. This producer, Isaac Thomas, produced a few English language ones and a few bilingual ones as well. They're not so politically, they're not at all political in his case, although many of them are moralities. This is the story in Luke, I think it is, isn't it, about Lazarus the beggar who was refused alms by the rich man, who's living in a very nice Cardigan villa there. Anybody know Cardigan? I live in a house like that. So. And of course, they both die. This one wakes up in finding himself in hell, looking up, and he sees Lazarus, the beggar man, looking down on him, clothed in white, and so on and so forth. It's a morality, and the poem down there to suit. So that's Isaac Thomas. The next two. But this is back to James Cope. This is a wonderful Cope print. Now you can see that this one is made up of several blocks. You can see there, okay, the division of how the blocks are put together. This is Adam and Eve. With a suitable text. It's a big print about this size, and I just want to draw your attention to this to finish up. Here's Cope's signature up here on the print. So we've got three elements here. We've got Cope, the printmaker, we've got John Thomas in this case, who writes the ballad, and we've got John Jones, the publisher and printer from Llanrwst. Very interesting chap, John Jones from Llanrwst, Trefnu originally. Let's have a look at the next two. Here he is. He lived long enough into the 19th century to be photographed. And this is his printing press. I can see nods, some people know about John Jones. He actually made his printing press himself, and not only did he make his first printing press himself, this is it, it's in the Science Museum in London. It was actually offered to some faggot, but they didn't want it. So, there we are. Anyway, yeah. Yes, absolutely, it's true. What is in some faggot is a collection of his blocks, including the blocks for that wonderful Adam and Eve. They're there. Well, we won't go there. We won't go there. But this is in the Science Museum anyway. And he also cast his own type. he cast his own type originally. We're talking about 1810, 1812, 1813 when he made this press. So these prints which we've been seeing, the James Cope prints, they're printed on this, okay? And what he has to do, what Jones has to do, of course, is not just print the things, he has to flog them. He has to get rid of them. How do you do that? Well, you employ ballad singers who take these things round. They stand in the fairs and the markets. They're, what do you call it? Pastun, and they beat out the time. They sing these things and then they sell them for a few pence. And there are a couple of very good texts of first-hand observations of these people working right into the 1850s and 1860s. Next two. This one just to show you that woodblock again, which we've seen before. It happens to be a woodblock which belonged to John Jones of Llanrwst. That's the press that's printed on, and that's the result in this particular case, the Athrawi Blentyn, one of the denominational children's magazines which were produced originally by Hughes for the Methodists, but they spread to all the other denominations. This one's 1842. Next one. So these are the last of the ballad singers that go around. This is from the Punch Cymraeg, and it depicts Owain Meirion, who was one of them, off to Borth, Fire Borth, there, and it's sort of a little satire on him, but you can see he's got Cam Newydd, a new ballad, a new song, and also mention of Welsh almanacs up here, and the almanac here, Almanac Cymru am Newydd Pump Naw for 1859. And on the other side, John Thomas's wonderful photograph of Abel Jones Barth Proust from Llanrwst. Abel or Abel, I don't know, how would you have said it? Abel? Abel, probably, yeah. And here you see him. He's got his ballad here, and his penny that he's charging for it, okay? And he's sitting there, and there's wonderful records of him going around and singing these ballads in the fair. So there's a whole network of producers, visual artists, writers, composers of ballads, visual artists. There's a printer, there's a publisher, and there's a distribution system getting these things out there into the community. It's an absolutely fascinating business. That's true. Now, it might seem we've come rather a long way from that, but in fact we haven't. You see, we haven't come very far at all, because this is the source. This is where those two streams come together. That very strange German ceramic and the tradition of imaging Welsh people in London come together, and through Hughes, specifically, we can really put our finger on it, through Hugh Hughes, this tradition comes back into Wales, and we get this upsurge of wonderful popular prints eventually in the 1830s and 1840s back in Wales. They're the same format. I mean, this is middle of the 18th century, this is nearly the middle of the 19th century. They're still using the same format, okay? But because Wales isn't an urban, hasn't got a sort of a market like London was, where everybody's gathered together and easy to reach, it was a much more difficult process distributing and producing these things in Wales, and that's one of the reasons why it takes much longer to get there. And last one, just to make the point that actually it is a quite a direct route through from that rather remarkable picture to this satirical anti-Welsh imagery right through to our own popular prints. I think it's a fascinating story, which is all kind of built into that picture. Thank you very much.
Mae pwysigrwydd, mae'r gwaith mae Peter a Mews Fenceto yn neud I ni fel Cymru'n bell gydaeddol, wrth gwrs, dydy. A dwi'n gwybod, yn y ddau ddarlith sydd wedi bod, mae yna gwestiynau eisiau gofyn. Felly, os ti'n iawn efo chi, Peter, offi I chi gofyn cwestiynau, ond dwi'n siŵr mae yna mwy o gwestiynau I gofyn byddai'n dilysgu iddiw.
Looking at my audience, I'm quite aware of some of you know probably more about a lot of this than I do, actually, but this position. All dumbfounded.
Ga I gychwyn? Sut ydych chi I gael y llun hyn?
Then?
Sut ydych chi llun mae'ch...
Oh, well, I got the picture because I had, I don't think I said, it's absolutely one of my pictures, this one. They're not all, I hasten to say, but they've been on the wall there, but this one belongs to me. When it came back from America, I didn't know about it, and I saw it at Christie's. and I haven't done art, but it's a lot of money. And a friend of mine, Jeremy Rye, who's also very important in this whole business of how the art market, much abused art market, has in fact been incredibly useful in bringing back many pictures to Wales which would otherwise have been lost, because you've got two people, Jeremy Rye and Miles Wincater, who you've had lecturing here, who pick these things up from all over Britain and America and bring them back to sell to fools like me who buy them. But Jeremy bought this for himself, actually, and then ran out of money and phoned me up about 2 years later. And, anyway, that's how I got it. But the sad thing is we don't know how it got to America. It's one of, in my collection I've got no less than 4 Welsh pictures which have come back from the United States. Miles also bought a very important Parry over in the United States as well. Especially artisan paintings, which I've talked to you about, I'm sure, before. Oh yes, when we had the artisan painting exhibition. Artisan paintings, because of the huge market in the United States for folk art, you know, in inverted commas, it's not actually folk art, it's middle class portrait painting, but they call it folk art. When nobody was interested here, or in England, by the way, as well, this applies to England as well, American buyers, and people acting for them, sucked out large quantities of Welsh 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century portraits into the American market. And it's only now that we're starting to get some of them back, including some very important ones. Some of you might have seen the 1732 portrait of Edward Owen of Penrhos at the Artisan Painters Exhibition. Do you remember that one? The earliest Welsh self-portrait. Do you remember it? Well, that came back from the United States as well. That turned up in Massachusetts, I think. So that's quite interesting. So that's gone the same route. It's been a long way.
We haven't got it all on Hughes, mae'n ymddangos I mi, bod o'n un o'r cymeriadau yma sydd wedi cael ei anwybyddu, a diolch I chi, dyn ni'n gwybod llawer am mwy amdano fo'n, o'r radicaliaid yna, Iolo Morgannwg falle sydd yn mwy anwybyddu, sef da ni'n dechrau gwerthfawrogi o'n mwy o fwy. Jack Lynn Gors yn meddwl, ond mae Jack Derfel a Hugh Hughes yn bobl wedi bod yn I mawrygu llawer am mwy.
Dylen ni yn sicr. Ac wrth gwrs mae un o'r problemau sydd gyda ni yw sgil effeithiau brad y llyfrau gleision a bobl yn troi at Saesneg, troi'r system addysg yng Nghymru tuag at y Saesneg ac yn camtawio i'r Saeson ar diwedd y bedwaredd ganrif ar 15 ac yn anwybyddu really y traddodiad radicalaidd yna. Talking about Iolo Morgannwg and the radical tradition in Wales, and in fact there is an ongoing project at the Centre for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies in Aberystwyth looking at Welsh radicalism in the period of the French Revolution, which has produced some remarkable scholarly work in Geraint H. Jenkins' book on Iolo Morgannwg in particular, very important. There's a whole series of books. I wrote a biography of Hugh Hughes, because this is the problem. It's interesting, isn't it? So I wrote a very big biography of Hughes. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was published back in the end of the 80s or 1990, something like that. I mean, it's a big book. I mean, he's a remarkable man, quite extraordinary man in so many ways. But of course, I wrote it in Gymraeg. And so you, me, and half a dozen other people know about it, and him. And the art world in Wales still, it's hopeless. What do you do? We know that problem, don't we? I mean, what the hell do you do? Because attitudes are changing in the National Museum, and I must acknowledge Oliver Fairclough here, the curator of art at the National Museum, has changed that place in the last 10 years. And there is, in fact, now a group of paintings which I discovered by Hugh Hughes, which are paintings of the children of a man called William Hughes, who was what was his business? He was in the shipping industry anyway, in Pwllheli, 1813. Yeah, they're now on the wall in the National Museum. Now, when I found them, they were filthy. I found them in a drawer, stuffed into a drawer in some faggots, and with no documentation at all. Nobody knew what they were. I was able to identify them because of one other picture, which we did know what it was, which was of Hugh Griffith of Bedwrla, down the road here. They're the same style and the same thing, but they've been just stuffed into a drawer. But, fair play, the National Museum, they are now up on the wall there. So, there's been a marginal change, but it is very difficult. And, because one of the things about Hughes in particular was his lifelong commitment to the Welsh language. And it's not a backward projection. He was passionately committed to the language. He just was. And it would have seemed ridiculous to write that book about him in English. You know, I mean, what I would love to do is, if somebody will give me some money, I'll write an English version of it, because we know so much more now than we did before. It would be a very important book to write, but, you know, it is difficult.
Going in hwnna I fyny, oedd Hugh Hughes yn byw am gyfnod yn Gaernarfon yn dod. Yn rhes i ddod yn meddwl oedd yn byw yna. Sgynna ni Gaernarfon hawl i'w hawlio fo. I gael rhyw fath o ffordd o'i gyflwyno fo yn Gaernarfon.
Ie, wel mae yna doi le, chi'n mynd i gael cystadleuaeth o ddiwedd cyfyrddin, cofiwch? Cofiwch? Say no more. The first part of his life, when he came back to Wales, as I said, he went from Liverpool, along, by the way, with John Gibson, at almost exactly the same time, just 2 years after Gibson. Hughes and Gibson were born very close together in the same year, and they both attended Pall Mall in Chapel Sunday School in Liverpool together. They knew each other. Because Gibson becomes the greatest sculptor in the world, and Hughes sinks without trace because he stays and works inside the Welsh community. But anyway, he then goes to London in 1814, and he does make a substantial reputation in London as a wood engraver. But he's already, from 1812, he's already painting. I mean, he's the source of the image of Thomas Charles of Bala. Every image you've ever seen of Thomas Charles, that's based on Hughes's miniature, done in 1812, you know, including the sculpture of Thomas Charles and the Bala. And then, because of the nature of his work, because he was an artisan painter, there were no towns in Wales big enough to sustain a resident painter of portraits in that period, so they had to move around. So Hughes is peripatetic for the rest of his life, and in fact he dies in Malvern. What he was doing, I don't quite know. But probably something to do with the Plymouth Brethren, because he became a member of the Plymouth Brethren later on in his life. And there was a cell of Plymouth Brethren over in Malvern, so he was probably visiting there. He died there. But there's no one place that you can associate particularly with him. But the two that have the strongest claim, where he did the most important work, are certainly Carmarthen and Carnarvon. One of the things he did in Carnarvon, which is very interesting, was in order to earn a living, he produced the first Welsh-produced panoramas. You know what a panorama is? Huge paintings. They were on rollers, and you paid a shilling, I think it was, to go in, and Hughes would unroll these huge panoramas. One of them was painted from the top of Snowdon. He actually went up there and painted it on the Van Arlle, on the top of Snowdon. And his only pupil, William Williams ap Glyn-y-Weddw, tells us about that, how he got into terrible trouble because the high wind came up, blew all his stuff away. Got into a terrible mess about that. But he had these panoramas there to earn a living. And of course he produced the first weekly newspaper in Welsh language, in Carnarvon. I mean, a remarkable achievement. He wrote most of it, along with William Williams, Caledrin. He wrote it, he printed it, he published it, he distributed it. You know, it was the first Welsh language weekly newspaper. And that is something that Carnarvon can definitely claim, which is very, very important.
Dwi'n gwybod pa mor bell mae'r term scapegoat yn mynd yn ôl yn iaith Saesneg. Oes yna gysylltiad rhwng y defnydd o'r gair yna i'r cyfnod yma? Ac wrth gwrs yn benodol i'r defnydd o'r afr.
Mae rai bod yna. Dwi ddim yn arbenigwr ar traddodiadau fath yna yn arbennig. Yr ateb gonest yw dwi ddim yn gwybod, ond siwr o fod. Mae'n ormod o digwyddiad, ond siwr o fod. I'm rapidly losing my voice.
Gawn ni atgoffa yma llyfr diweddara Peter Hunan Gofiant yma ar werth, a gyfle da I gael Peter I arwyddo fo I chi hefyd, felly mae ugain o gopio hyn ar gael. A ddarlith nesaf, ym mis Mehefin, a weithfad o Mehefin, Robert Merrick a Sionny Williams, Sionny Williams sydd yn berthnasol iawn i'r ardal yma, nifer, a fi'n cofio am y Sionny Williams yn dod felly. Bydd honna ddarlith gwerthu I gweld, a allwch chi ysgweld cyddad o'r hwnna lawr yn y dyddiadau rwan. Felly, I gloi, ysgol ni roi diolch eto I peterlord.